At this point, you already know what ser and estar mean. They both mean to be. You know how to conjugate them. You know how to say I am, you are, etc. in the present tense. But what you still struggle with is knowing when to use which. So in this video, I'm gonna solve that once and for all. Now, rather than introducing you to a bunch of rules, writing a bunch of stuff on a chalkboard, I'm just gonna give you one rule and a bunch of examples. Now, before I give you the rule, I need you to understand that in any language, most rules have exceptions. However, if you apply this rule I'm about to tell you, more often than not, you're gonna be correct. So we're gonna go through that, and by the end of this video, you're gonna be a complete beast at knowing when to use ser and estar. All right, so I won't keep you waiting any longer. What is the damn rule? Ser is used for characteristics or inherent qualities. So just keep that in mind as we go through the examples. Is it a characteristic or an inherent quality? Whereas estar is used for a state or a condition. So I'll just give you one example to start us off. If you were to say, I am happy, you would say, estoy feliz. Or I am sad, estoy triste. And you'd use estar because that's a state, that's a condition. It's not an inherent characteristic of yours. You're not saying that you're always sad. You're just saying right now, estoy triste, I am sad. And if you think about it, estar comes from the word estado, which means status. Actually, I don't know if it comes from that word, but that's a connection I noticed. So it makes sense that estar is like to be, as in the current status of being. So I could say soy feliz if I wanted to express that I'm always happy. I'm just a happy person. That's different than saying estoy feliz, which is something just happened and right now my current status is I'm happy. So that'll definitely make more sense as we go through all these examples. So strap up and let's get into it. Okay, first example, you want to say I am from England. Would you use ser or estar? You would use ser because that's a characteristic of yours that you can't change. You're from that place, that's your background. So if you want to say I'm from England, it would be yo soy de Inglaterra. And soy is the conjugation of ser in the present tense for yo. I'm not gonna keep going through the conjugations because you can find them online. Moving on to the next example. Let's say you wanted to say I am in the kitchen. So again, that's to be, I am. Would you use estar or ser? So are we talking about a characteristic, an inherent quality? Is it an inherent characteristic of yours that you're in the kitchen? Or is it your state, your current state? It's obviously your current state. Whenever you're talking about where you are, you use estar. So I am in the kitchen, yo estoy en la cocina. I am in the kitchen, estoy en la cocina. And that's whether you're talking about yourself or if you're talking about a city. Londres está en Inglaterra. So that part's a little confusing because you might think London is in England. Seems to me like a characteristic of London. It's in England, so it should be ser. But it's not. So whenever you're talking about location, it's considered a state. Whenever you're talking about location, it's estar. Let's move on to the next example. Let's say you wanted to say she is nice. Ella blank amable. Would you use ser or estar? So again, is it a characteristic, an inherent quality of hers? Or is it a temporary state? Is she just being nice right now? So it depends on the context, but in this case, we're talking about she is nice in general. That's the obvious implication. So it's ser. Ella es amable. She is nice. Now, if she is usually rude and today she's nice, then you would say hoy está amable because that's like her state. It's a current state. It's a condition. It's not how she always kind of inherently, characteristically tends to be. It's not necessarily one or the other. Sometimes both work, and it just depends what meaning you're trying to express. Okay, so hopefully it's starting to separate ser versus estar. Some people like to think of it as being temporary versus permanent, like ser is the permanent, more permanent way of being, and estar is more of a temporary way of being. That is another way to look at it, but that also introduces certain exceptions. So I just like to think of it as characteristic versus state. Anyways, let's move on to the next example. What if you wanted to say I am tall? Tall is alto. I think of it as like altitude, alto. And short is bajo. So is it estar or ser? Well, being tall is your characteristic. You can't really change it. So it's not like a temporary status. So you would use ser. I am tall, yo soy alto. You are short, tú eres bajo. Now, if let's say somebody's usually short and they're wearing some massive high heels, okay? Or if you used to be short and then got that knee breaking surgery where you become taller and now he's tall, you could be like, oh wow, está alto. Right now, their temporary status is that they're tall, then you would use estar. Está alta. But typically when you're talking about how tall someone is, you're not talking about a temporary status, you're talking about their characteristic. So you use ser. Now the thing that might confuse you, here's an example of why I try and avoid the whole temporary versus permanent definition, where ser is for permanent things and estar is for temporary things. Because if you wanted to say I am fat or I'm skinny, those are both temporary conditions that you can change. Either you eat more or you eat less and you'll change physically. It still uses ser because it's a characteristic of yours. Same thing with being weak or being strong. You would say es fuerte, he is strong. Es débil, he is weak. Anyways, we're going way into nuances now, but I hope you get the point. Now, what if you wanted to say I am tired? So that's not a physical characteristic, but it's a physical condition. Or I am sick. Would that be ser or estar? So I just gave it away. I said it's not a characteristic, it is a condition or a state, so it's obviously estar. So I am tired, estoy cansado. Or if you're a woman, estoy cansada. Or if you wanted to say she is sick, ella está enferma. All right, moving into another use of the verb to be. Whenever you're talking about your relationship with someone, you use the verb to be. I am their friend. I am her neighbor. They are my parents. Ellos son mis padres. We are a couple. Somos novios. Just remember that for relationships, you use ser. I have an exercise at the end of this that will test you on your knowledge, and you're gonna make a lot of mistakes as a beginner, and that's a good thing because it means there's a lot of room to learn, and then you won't have to pause in the middle of a conversation to think, do I use ser or estar here? Anyways, the next example, we use to be to talk about the time. So it is 1 p.m. What time is it? Would you use estar or ser? Just memorize that whenever you're talking about the time, it's ser. What time is it? Is ¿qué hora es? ¿Qué hora es? It is 1 o'clock. Es la una. So when you say the time on the clock, in English we use o'clock, whatever that even means. I don't know why that's said that way. In Spanish, it's a little bit more simple. It's just, it's the one. Es la una. Or son las dos. Notice it went from es to son and la to las. That's because one is singular, whereas two is plural, three is plural, every number after one is plural. So es la una, it's 1 o'clock, whereas son las dos, it is 2 o'clock. Son is the conjugation for they. The conjugation of the verb has to match the plurality. Now we also use to be to say our profession or our occupation, what we do. If you want to say she is a lawyer, would you use ser or estar? This one we can go back to the definition I introduced where ser is your characteristic and estar is a state. Think of identity, any sort of identifying statement. The flower is red, it's your permanent, it's your like inherent identity. You use ser. Not your state, it's your identity. So your career is your identity. I am a lawyer. Again, it's not necessarily permanent. You can obviously change your career, which is why I don't like to say that ser is necessarily for permanent things, but I like to think of it as it's for a characteristic. So your characteristic, your identity is your lawyer. So if it's anything to do with identity, use ser. If I wanted to say this is a phrase or this is a sentence, would I use ser or estar? Again, I'm identifying this as a sentence, so ser. It's es, which is a conjugation of ser. So the same thing applies to saying I am American, I am Canadian, yo soy canadiense. It's not estoy canadiense, it's soy canadiense. It's your identity. All right, so I think we've gone through enough examples and you have a better feel of ser and estar now. So to test you, I'm gonna give you a few questions and let's see if you get them right. So if you wanted to say coffee is good, would you use ser or estar? You can pause the video if you need to think about it, but the answer is ser. El café es bueno. And it's ser because you're talking about, in general, coffee, one of its characteristics is it's good. So it's kind of like that, esta es una frase, this is a sentence. You're identifying it as a sentence. In this case, you're identifying the coffee with being good. Another example, if you wanted to say summer is hot, you can pause the video, but again, that's a general characteristic. It's how we identify summer. It's hot, so it's ser, so el verano es caliente. Summer is hot. But if you wanted to talk about it being hot today or it being cloudy today, you would use estar. So it's cloudy today, está nublado hoy. Anyways, I have way more exercises like this in the exercise that you can access in the description. That's all for this video. Thank you for watching. I hope you got some value out of it, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.